African countries have renewed their push for permanent seats at the United Nations Security Council.
Addressing the United Nations General Assembly debate last September, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa reiterated Africa's demand for a permanent UN Security Council seat.
On the 75th anniversary of the UN, we repeat our call for greater representation of African countries on the Security Council.
Hello, I'm Mubarak Kenya.
And I am Shilene Lima. Welcome to this week's edition of Africa Today, a program which brings you an in-depth analysis on issues affecting the African continent.
In today's edition, we are focusing on Africa's renewed quest for a permanent seat at the UN Security Council. We're asking, are world powers willing to open up the UN Security Council and have equal representation for all?
In our show today, we shall also discuss African heritage sites facing threat from climate change and what needs to save them.
We also have our weekly update of interesting news from all corners of Africa. And before we wind up, we are going to look at your comments on our social media pages. So keep the comments coming as you watch our show.
Africa demands permanent UNSC seat. African countries have renewed their push for permanent seats at the United Nations Security Council. In his pre-recorded address to the United Nations General Assembly debate last September, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, who is also the current chairperson of the African Union, said the UN Security Council needs to reflect the current realities across the world.
The current composition of the Security Council does not reflect the world in which we live. On the 75th anniversary of the UN, we repeat our call for greater representation of African countries on the Security Council and that this be taken up with urgency at the intergovernmental negotiations. It is only through a reformed and inclusive UN Security Council that we will be able to collectively resolve some of the world's most protracted conflicts.
For more on this, we have contacted Professor Macharia Munene, United Nations expert on decolonization and professor of history and international relations at the United States International University in Nairobi. Also joining us today is Julius Mbaluto, a London-based journalist and African affairs analyst. Thank you, gentlemen, and let's start off with Professor Munene. Now, what's your take on renewed calls by African countries to have a permanent seat at the UN Security Council with veto powers?
Thank you. It is a good idea that African countries should renew and should persist in demanding to be included in the highest level of international council, Security Council. It's a good idea because they are excluded, and those who are excluded have an obligation to keep on demanding to be included.
Thank you for that, Professor Macharia Munene, United Nations decolonization expert.
The African Union adopted a common position for expanded and fair representation on the Security Council back in 2005.
During his chairmanship of the African Union in 2016, the then Zimbabwe's president, the late Robert Mugabe, lamented the dictatorial nature of the UN Security Council.
We come to the United Nations, it's ceremonial. Every year, September, we are there. We pay lots of money to go there. And to the General Assembly, we make speeches, we go back home, year in, year out. But the bosses in the Security Council say, you shall never have the powers that we have as permanent members. And we have asked and asked and asked. And asked and asked. Reform the Security Council.
That was quite a powerful message to the world powers. Mr. Mbaluto, over to you. Why have the world powers failed to respond to frequent calls by Africa for permanent representation at the UN Security Council?
All these powers that be, they want to benefit from raw materials from Africa, resources from Africa. If Africa was to be given a proper voice, equal chance to speak, probably then Africa will challenge some of these things because they will be seen as an equal partner. But I promise you that the problem that has been there is just because the world order, the way it is, it works to the favor of the permanent members of Security Council, but also the Western nations that, even though they are not permanent members, those who colonized Africa, it happens to their favor, but they would rather Africa stays where it is so that the world order whereby they tell Africa what to do will be perpetuated.
Africa wants more say at the Security Council to find solutions for the instability on the continent. This is the point that was put forward by South Sudan President in his address to the UN General Assembly this year.
The geopolitical realities in the world have changed, and UN Security Council remains the same. This situation cannot remain the same any longer, and that is why I am adding my voice to the demand by the African Union for 2 permanent seats in the Security Council. Africans demand this because we are the most affected by the Council's decisions and resolutions.
If Africa's wish is granted, is there consensus on which country should represent the continent, especially if we consider the recent tight race between Djibouti and Kenya for non-permanent membership at the Council?
At present, you have those countries in Africa that are considered to be pivotal to the region, and each would want to be that. So there is no consensus at present. That does not foreclose the possibility of building a consensus in case there is an opportunity which does not appear to be coming very soon. You refer to the Kenya and Djibouti tight campaigns, but it turns out, at least from the Kenyan perspective, Djibouti was not the issue, and Djibouti had actually accepted that it had lost to Kenya. But then you have these extra-continental forces.
It's not just Africa that is demanding the reform of the UN Security Council. The Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, declared that United Nations reform is the need of the hour as he addressed the UN General Assembly via video. Let's take a listen.
आखिर कब तक भारत को संयुक्त राष्ट्र के डिसीजन मेकिंग स्ट्रक्चर से अलग रखा जाएगा?
How can African countries coordinate with other regional powers in Asia and Latin America to demand for wider representation at the UN Security Council?
Gang up, not as individual regions or countries, because it's a two-step thing. First of all is to force the United Nations to accept the principle of expansion, permanent seats being expanded or the Security Council being expanded. If that one is accepted, and it can be accepted if all the other regions that are excluded come together the way they used to do in the non-aligned movement, and sometimes in the third world deliberations, they tended to have that unity of purpose.
The late Kofi Annan, former UN Secretary General, warned that failure to reform the UN Security Council might affect its credibility in future.
I think we need to reform the Council for other regions and other powerful countries to feel that it's fair in terms of representation and in terms of democracy. If it is not done, the Council is going to come under stress and pressure. Instead of collaboration, you may get into destructive competition where some will begin to challenge or ignore Council decisions. The structure today reflects the realities of 1945. The world has changed and the UN has to change. We have to adapt.
How will failure to reform the UN Security Council impact on the world body and international relations?
We may see withdrawal, probably. We may see withdrawal Or we may see a situation where a continent of like Africa says, oh, we don't want United Nations. We just want to keep Africa Union going.
Thanks, Mr. Mbaluto, for that. Professor Munene, do you think the UN Security Council can face a similar fate as that of the International Criminal Court, where some countries have openly defied it?
The ICC turned out to be a kangaroo court for facing countries and people the big powers did not like. And we saw that in Kenya as an example of the kangaroo aspect of the ICC, where they start with conclusions before they have the evidence. And that's why the Kenyan case is collapsed, because the whole thing was a charade. It is also the same reason that the United States, which was in the forefront of creating the ICC, then turned around and said, this thing can be used against American interests, therefore no way. It does not accept it. And so therefore it becomes an instrument of geopolitical control and manipulation, which then erodes not only the ICC, but the United Nations itself as a body that came up with this thing that is not applicable to all in the world. So because it tends to exempt big powers like the United States, France, China, Russia, and Britain, to that extent, then it is not a credible body. And unfortunately, that's what has come up, and the evidence is there. When poor Fatou Bensouda said she was going to investigate some American atrocities, her visa was cancelled immediately, and that was it. So the ICC cannot deal with the big powers.
Very well put there by Professor Munene. Some international organs are tools used by superpowers for geopolitical manipulation.
Will other countries sit by and watch? Only time will tell.
And now we move to the segment of our program where we bring you news and events from across Africa. Sheila, what do you have in store for us today?
Thank you, Henia. This week we have sports, legal battles, but first, friendship over foes. The presidents of Malawi and Tanzania have agreed to focus on building economic cooperation instead of warring over the Lake Malawi border dispute. The lake is believed to be rich in oil and gas. Tanzania claims to own half the lake, while Malawi disputes this assertion. Now, Outara Stadium in Ivory Coast is now in operation. The 50,000 capacity venue cost over $250 million and is a refurbishment of the old Stade Stadium. The stadium is set to host the opening and closing game of the African Cup of Nations. Now, onto the economy. The Bank of Tanzania announced that the Tanzanian economy is to grow by over 5% in 2020 despite the pandemic. The growth has been owed to adequate food supply, a stable exchange rate, moderate oil prices, and prudent policies. Now, still on economy, Central African states are set to end the export of timber effectively by 1st of January 2022. This, they say, is to stimulate the production of timber to the GDP of the member states. They have also adopted a uniform forestry tax system. Now, in sports, South Africa's Pitso Mosimane joined Egypt's Al Ahly Football Club as the coach. The club has a long history of international coaches. President Ramaphosa congratulated the coach, stating that it is a recognition of talent and a demonstration of African pride. Now, that's all that we had for you this week. Visit our social media pages for more news updates and our episode highlights. Feel free to tag us in your posts. Don't go away, we have more coming up.
African heritage sites under threat.
The impact of climate change on Africa's heritage sites has previously not been given the seriousness it deserves.
But this is bound to change after a shocking report indicated that several African heritage attractions are facing serious threats of extinction mainly from continued human activities and changing weather patterns. This restaurant owner in Benin elaborates.
Si on ne protège pas notre environnement, eh ben, on ne peut pas vivre. On ne peut pas vivre. On peut pas vivre, c'est pas possible. Tout le monde doit prendre conscience, les ordures doivent être gérées, l'État doit mettre des programmes pour les enlèvements des ordures, le traitement des ordures. Tout doit se faire correctement.
A new survey published in the journal Azania, Archaeological Research in Africa, has highlighted heritage sites across Africa that are at risk. Some of the African heritage sites facing danger include Suakin in Sudan, Lama Old Town in Kenya, several coastal sites in the Comoros Islands, colonial forts and castles in Ghana, rock art in Namibia, and the Great Mosque of Djenné in Mali.
For an incisive analysis on this, we contacted Shadrach Chirikure, archaeologist, professor and head of Department of Archaeology at the University of Cape Town. Thanks for your time, Professor Chirikure. Heritage has been neglected in climate change discourses. Has this contributed to the current threat faced by African heritage sites?
Yes, and climate change is also about sustainable development, and heritage has been marginalized from that discourse. So when people talk about how changing climate affect lives, we are talking about how unsustainable development affects heritage. So that poses a threat to African heritage sites. It also poses a threat to African people. So the best would be to integrate, to think about heritage and put it into the center of climate change, as well as into the center of development discourse.
Recent heavy rainfall over in Sudan has resulted in extensive flooding, destroying homes, infrastructure, farms, and livelihoods of communities. World Heritage Sites affected include the island of Meroe and Jebel Barkal and the sites of the Napatan region. A Sudanese archaeologist says the country's heritage belongs to Africa and needs to be protected.
These monuments are not just for Sudan. It's something the entire black race should be proud of. A testament that we too have a rich history of might and power.
How will people in Africa be affected if the continent's heritage is lost due to climate change and negligence?
Heritage is all about identity. It is about the soul of a people and the soul of any nation. So if the heritage is lost due to lack of care and due to climate change, then it also means that the people in Africa will lose their identity. They will lose the glue that holds them together.
Professor Chirukure there says that heritage is the soul of the people. Now in Mali, people have literally taken the matter into their own hands to preserve their heritage. Grand Mosque of Djenné in Mali is one of the threatened sites in Africa.
Locals gather there annually to perform cultural rituals to protect this ancient site.
na yer yarga jirku o yanir kay ulungu na fangamo asasara nati gan yer furga yer yarga o kamne.
Now, are African governments in a position to fund the preservation of heritage sites in the continent?
There is need for African governments to prioritize the preservation of all heritage as broadly defined, because it is important in promoting the economic fortunes of the countries. It is also important in building identity and also in bringing in peace. So if the governments of Africa prioritizes heritage development, yes.
China, the US, the European Union, India, and Russia account for over half of global annual greenhouse gas emissions that is driving global climate change. Researchers say poor countries bear the brunt of climate change despite emitting least carbon dioxide. Should world powers that lead in polluting the environment take the responsibility of assisting African countries to protect heritage threatened by climate change?
This is a very big question, and which would speak to the inequalities in the world at the moment. So, using the principle of the polluter pays, certainly the major emitters of the greenhouse gases must contribute towards helping particularly countries in Africa to protect their heritage coming out of being threatened by climate change.
Lamu Old Town in Kenya is the oldest and best preserved Swahili settlement in East Africa. Apart from dangers this UNESCO heritage site faces due to climate change, residents are also concerned about plans to build a coal plant in the area.
Our leaders, we have elected you. You have the right to represent us. We, the community, the society, we do not want this project. We do not want coal.
Clearly, Africa's heritage is also under threat from economic development. What role can governments play in preventing further damage to the continent's heritage?
The moment Africa realizes that the heritage is important in terms of achieving sustainable development, which also means that in terms of urbanization, as the urban settlements expand, there's also need to think about how to protect heritage and also to use heritage to bring people together, to emphasize our shared history, our common origin as humanity. If we can do that, then we will be able to use heritage as a resource for promoting peace.
Welcome back to this part of the show. It is now time to see what you, our viewers, had for us this week. Now, we had comments about the show's topics where we had Amatone stating, make a report about End SARS Now protests in Nigeria. Let our voices be heard. For those unaware, SARS is a police force that has been devastating the lives of the youth in Nigeria. Police brutality and extrajudicial killings have driven the uproar. We also had Lewis Njovu stating, when are you bringing Zambia to discuss its governance as we go to vote in August 12th? Well, to the both of you, thanks for the suggestions. We shall delve into those discussions, so stay tuned for that. We also had Stephen Mohammed from LinkedIn sharing, love your program, Africa Today. You do an excellent job talking on pressing issues. Good job on the hosts. You represent us well. Thanks for that, Stephen. We are glad that you are watching. Now, on the topic of U.S. dumping plastics in Kenya, we had Leah stating that Africa is already suffering from plastic waste. Getting more from Trump's country will destroy us. Countries need to do more to limit or end plastic pollution. Well, that is all we had for you. Thanks for staying tuned. Keep the comments coming. Till next time.
And with that, we come to the end of this week's edition of Africa Today, which looked into Africa's quest for a permanent seat at the UN Security Council.
We also discussed the threat that African heritage sites face from climate change.
We hope you enjoyed our show. Drop a line through our social media pages and let us know your views.
On behalf of Africa Today team, thanks a lot for watching the show. And until next time, goodbye.